Welcome to Risk Roundup. While the emerging technology trends seems to be both tenuous and temporary, they are rapidly becoming integrated with every component of a nation. So the question we need to ask is how we can visualize and act upon a future that is not so transparent and is turbulent. From artificial intelligence to robotics, blockchain to cryptocurrencies, internet to brainnet, virtual reality to augmented reality, Internet of Things to Internet of Everything, autonomous vehicles to smart vehicles, CRISPR technology to gene editing, drones to flying cars, 3D printing to molecular manufacturing, nanotechnology to biotechnology, we are facing fundamental transformation. So as we stand upon the precipice of change and prepare for the inevitable transformation of human ecosystem across cyberspace, aquaspace, geospace, and space, a discussion focused on the emerging technology trends is necessary for us to visualize the future. To discuss emerging technology trends further, I'm delighted to welcome Bob Trojan to Risk Roundup. Bob is a global advisor to the digital economy and is serving on 3 UN Commission working groups selected by World Bank, OS, and APEC to advise emerging nations on FinTech and RegTech, appointed by US Secretary of Commerce for Trade Finance Advisory Council, and he's a frequent speaker at industry events. He's also the CEO of Financial Service Insights and he's based in the United States. Welcome, Bob. We're honored to have you on Risk Roundup.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful, Bob. So, emerging technologies has brought nations the most turbulent and transformative period. The changes and challenges of the ongoing technology-triggered transformation are so profound that there has never been a time of greater promise or potential peril. So, out of the many technological trends emerging in your assessment, which are the most promising technology trends?
So what we are in right now is a unique time of convergence. And so usually we would have one great change at a time, whether it's industrialization or the creation of the computer or creation of the internet. And now we are in a time of great convergence of many transformational technologies happening all at once. So we now have a place to put incredible amounts of data in the cloud. We have new sources of data from Internet of Things, both structured and unstructured data, where we can have satellite images and images from traffic cameras, and just in even our thermostats in our homes, in our social media streams. Enormous amounts of data, and now we have a place to put it in the cloud. And now coupled with that, we have artificial intelligence or machine learning. So now we have the capability to understand what's going on with all of those incredible, difficult sources of data. And putting that all together gives us, as you said, an incredible opportunity for good, as well as a lot of potential for unintended consequences.
Very true. No. So you're right. This is a time of great potential, and it could. These are all dual use technologies. So yes, we can do a lot of good with these technologies, and a lot of bad can also happen. So understanding the technology trends is about preparing for the coming years. So which technology trends you think are most likely to disrupt businesses, enterprises in 2020?
So in 2020, so we've had the last few years, blockchain was the big thing. And now blockchain is in the Gartner phase of trough of disillusionment. And so what that means is that actual real people, business people, technology people are creating solutions in the background now. And it'll be a year or 2 or 5, like we saw in the cloud, of hard work before something comes out the other end with the next big monster app. And so blockchain we need to keep an eye on. However, in much more real time, I'm seeing a lot more interest in artificial intelligence and machine learning, particularly having to do with advanced analytics, in a number of different spaces, particularly in financial services as well as in the healthcare space. And so we've got all this new data, all these new types of data, and the math and the technology that historically has been used in Wall Street. For example, high frequency trading, and so there's an incredible depth of modeling and data structuring that's happened in that space that is now being used in health, in financial services, both in the United States and outside. And now coupling that with alternative data sources, particularly in out of the United States, places like Africa, where we've seen with, for example, M-Pesa and other more mobile phone and communication-based data being put together with advanced analytics to figure out who are the better credits and who are the ones that should not be extended credit. Yes. And then we're also seeing that connected to a very foundational question of identity. And so in advanced countries like the United States and Europe, we have the basic data points for identification. We have name. Everyone has a name. And then we have an address. However, once you get into Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, that second data point, address, is not something that everyone has. And so data point number 2 is where you get into trouble. And so utilizing new technology like GPS or chips within phones to be able to be the equivalent of identities or to help with biometrics to create identity, that is a necessary and very exciting component of getting this disruptive technology into emerging economies.
No, you made some really good points. Now, the point that you made about in South Africa that not everyone has addresses. What is the reason behind that?
Well, there's so historically there's it's something we take for granted that there are streets and street names and these cities, these villages, these towns, have not grown up with Western addressing systems, and so the kind of the zip codes of the world, and so that's something that needs to help. For example, why doesn't Amazon work in Sub-Saharan Africa? Because where do you deliver the packages to? And so it's been just a historical construct that needs to be solved, and frankly, they are solving where you can identify where people are. You also have migration of citizens due to war, famine, other things. So as refugees cross borders, they don't have permanent addresses. How do you get aid and financial services and other services to those people? And so the United Nations and the World Bank and a lot of others have been working on how to have transportational identity. So kind of self-sovereign identity, where I can prove that I am me based on a combination of my mobile phone as well as my biometrics.
Oh, that's very interesting, transportational identity. But you're right. I mean, there is a need for that identity to be solved, because right now, if you see, like you just mentioned about it, that, in South Africa, that there is a problem. Not everybody has the permanent, location, or they don't even have homes. So where do you deliver the package? That is a big problem. And each nation, if you look at it, every country has their own national ID system. I mean, we have our social security number that we tie to the individual identity. India has Aadhaar ID card, and and Brazil and many other countries, they are also moving towards a national ID system. So uh, unless we come up with a global ID system, where irrespective of where we are, whether irrespective of even if we are citizen of United States, if we travel to UK, or if we travel to South Africa or anywhere, that ID should travel with us. So I think what you are telling about the transportation ID will be very useful and very beneficial, because you can carry it with you irrespective of where you are in the world, irrespective of what citizenship you have. So that will be very, very helpful if we are able to move forward, if the UN is able to make that happen, and that would be amazing. And the point that you made earlier about the cloud, it seems that yes, cloud brings a lot of benefits. And if we have all those different data sources that are emerging because of the IoTs, and because of this increased connectivity between cyberspace, aquaspace, geospace, and space, we will be getting a lot more data. And that data, if it's stored in the cloud, unless another source emerges where we can store. But right now cloud looks like where all the data will be stored. So, but it seems that in spite of the huge potential that we see with the cloud, it's not used effectively still, by all the enterprises or the governments, or, all the components of a nation, to be able to take the benefit of the AI component, AI and machine learning, to analyze it, and, to use the data analytics tool and get some intelligence out of it. And we don't see that, across nations. Why do you think is not moving forward as we would like it to?
Well, I think there's a couple of areas. One of which is governments, in order to sometimes protect their citizens under the guise of that, are requiring data locality, so that the data must reside within the country's borders, which is very difficult while simultaneously doing cloud computing, because the cloud physically resides in data centers in major locations. So if you require data locality, particularly with smaller countries, you will not be able to get that in the cloud, because there are no cloud instances, cloud service data centers within smaller countries. And so, although perhaps the intention of data locality is good to protect the privacy and data security of citizens, one needs to really look at the cross-border aspects of data, because there are some nations that require the data to stay within the country, when in fact some of the largest and most effective fraud schemes involve cross-border data. And so the bad guys can share data across borders easily, but the good guys have difficulty to follow the rules and share data across borders, even law enforcement. And so we found that some major banks, cybersecurity experts share knowledge of significant issues across small WhatsApp apps groups informally, because they can't formally do it now, given the laws of certain countries. So we need to look at what the impact is of focusing data privacy and data security only on a country basis, as opposed to looking at a regional or global basis.
Yes, no, the data locality, I mean, what EU has come up with, for the data privacy, that the data has to reside within the country, and then, others are trying to follow the same path too. That brings us, both risk and rewards, because one is, yes, you may end up getting the privacy, but the whole reason why we established the cyberspace and this digital connectivity it was the reason that we can all connect, we can all benefit from the data that we generate. And because if we have the global data, we can analyze so many things. We can analyze why there is still poverty, why there are so many problems across nations, why in spite of, let's say, United States giving so much financial aid to other countries, why those countries are still poor and why the aid is not reaching the right people. So there are a lot of problems that we could solve if we have that access to the global data. Now, if we are trying to save all that data, keep it, just within the country, yes, you will maintain privacy, but at what cost? And the second thing is that even if, let's say, you establish rules that if somebody, breaks the rule and takes the data out of the country, the companies will be, I think, willing to pay the fine, because the data that they get by paying the fine is going to be much more valuable than paying the fine. So there are still, I am not sure whether the laws that EU has come up with are going to succeed, because in current format what they are proposing is the penalty, if anybody takes the data outside, that probably is not a very effective solution, and nor it is very wise to just keep it in silo. Yes, you can have a broad coalition with which countries you want to share, which is fine if you don't want to share with all the countries, but just not sharing with any country, that is probably not the right move for the purpose that we have established cyberspace for. So there are a lot of questions, and there are a lot of these events that we need to debate and discuss whether we are making the right moves, because at the end of the day, the whole reason is to connect and get the intelligence that we need so we solve problems. With just localization, we are not going to be able to solve problems. So if we talk about the innovations and trends that lie beyond the digital frontier, that is the cyberspace, what is the value of these innovations you see beyond the digital space? Because everybody is so focused on cyberspace, everybody is so focused just on the internet and all these technologies, that we are kind of ignoring what is happening in the geospace or space or aquaspace. So this is not just about the cyberspace. There are a lot of innovation happening beyond cyberspace. So what is your observation of what the innovations are happening beyond the digital space?
So beyond the digital space, so there's even the spaces you mentioned are all touched by the digital space. And
Yes.
so, for example, we talked about one of the key trends, in addition to cloud and Internet of Things and artificial intelligence, was blockchain, or more broadly, distributed ledger technology. And so using distributed data is actually one of the more interesting things that has come up recently, and touches all of the places you just mentioned. Because the data, so for example, looking at the oceans and the life in the oceans, particularly fisheries and sea life. I'm working with an organization that's using distributed ledger technology to be able to track fish and fish catches and who the kind of the whole seafood industry, and how to protect that in a much better way, because having all of that data about the ocean ecosystem in one place is almost impossible. And so the data is going to be distributed forever. And so now looking at some of the newer technologies like distributed ledger technology, you can really touch on areas that sound very far from the digital space, the depths of the oceans. But by using that kind of technology and data that is resident on ships and on satellites and in oceanographic sensors, that is all digital, but also so distributed as to be almost impossible to access. And that's where I think is a good use for distributed ledger technology. You mentioned in your prior comment about kind of having all of the data of the world in one place, so that we can see the big trends. I think we need to look at the data around the world, but centralizing that into one place, is one school of thought. Another school of thought is to continue to have it distributed, but rather than having the analytics looking at a centralized database, you can now have the analytics, the models go visit the data in the places they reside in other places. That's kind of the cutting edge of looking at, putting analytics on its head, is rather
True.
than bringing to the data to the analytics, bring the analytics to the data.
Oh, of course, I would never promote centralization of data because it brings a lot of security risk there. But
Right,
I
right.
do
It's
promote
very tempting.
access. We do need access to all the data. That
Yes.
doesn't mean that, even if it resides, let's say, within those countries, the access is very important. We don't need to take the data out of the country. We can keep it within each country because each country is sovereign country. So you keep the, data within your country, which is fine. But there should be access for research purpose. There should be access for solving problems. So even if we don't give access for business, and even for business, there should be access, for collaboration. So just closing the doors is not the right strategy, but distributed, access. I always promote that we need to have a distributed approach because there is no need for all of that data, everything to happen in one place, because that is actually, very dangerous for many other reasons. So we do need to have a distributed approach, but we do need access, and that is something that nations need to talk about as we go forward. Now, if we talk about intelligence, I mean, few years back, we could achieve, about a decade back, you could say that we could achieve competitive intelligence by just embracing innovations and trends that are already ever underway. And we can just, if one is doing that, then another company can copy that and they will still be successful. But today, this I mean, this would be considered a reactive approach. If somebody is doing something and we try to do that, considered a reactive approach, and it's not enough to succeed. So in a span of 10 years, a lot has changed. So what do you think has changed, that it's not enough for any company, any enterprise, any business to do what others are doing, and hope that they would succeed or they would be able to stay in the game?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it gets us, I think, to kind of the big question of so now we have all of this capability that we can do, and some countries are using AI, cloud, Internet of Things, unstructured data, and we've got now the issue of big tech in the United States as well as around the world, and so what should the rules around utilizing all of this new capability be? Because as you mentioned in your opening remarks, that these technologies can be used for good or can be tempting for unfortunate purposes. And so to get to the question of, so how can we bring all of this forward for good and not for bad purposes? I think we need to really look at the framework and the rules of the road for having access to all the data you just mentioned, and what we do with that. There's incredible amounts of good and convenience that can be done with technology, for example, like facial recognition. However, facial recognition can also have a darker side where it is used to overly police or to invade personal rights. And there's countries that are very advanced in that space that are effectively using it to control their citizens, versus others that are making it just more convenient to get into airports. And so facial recognition is an excellent example of where we need to really figure out as a society, as a global society, what is the right use and what is not the right use for some of these technologies.
Yes, and it's becoming very challenging to define those boundaries or rules because if you see, it's not just the governments that control the facial recognition technology anymore. It's many private enterprises that have, the facial recognition technology, and they have the users by billions, or millions, that they can, track. So that is where, I think it's going to be very difficult to regulate this technology and keep the boundaries. And we will have to see how the redistribution of the power that is happening because of all these technologies, that how we control the misuse of that, because it's not the governments that are in control anymore. It's, a lot of private enterprises, large corporations, that are controlling these technologies. These are very powerful technologies, very disruptive technologies, and the control is with the private corporations. So we'll have to see as we move forward how to manage these effectively, so that we all can benefit without much security risk coming our way. So let's talk about the cognitive technologies. It seems they're growing very rapidly. So what trends do you see as you travel across nations of its applications and where it is going?
So, cognitive technologies is a big space. What specifically are you thinking about here?
Virtual reality, augmented reality, where do you think, how do you see it redefining the human CAGS ecosystem?
So, again, that's very early. That's another very early trend. And so, of course, it's been, very popular in gaming, and which, by the way, is where a lot of really great technologies start. And where we may see eventually, evolution of cryptocurrencies to come out of gaming space, perhaps. But also in training of individuals, like pilots. So advanced skills workers, I'm seeing. I'm also seeing it in, of all places, travel and tourism. So you can make a virtual visit to a landmark or a hotel, a new hotel, and experience that before you get there. So it's being used as a sales technique for travel and tourism. It's been engaged for quite some time in things like military training, and to do augmented reality scenarios for fighting. And so I'm seeing that as we've seen in many cases where, like the internet and other places that started in the government or the military space is now coming, like space, coming into the commercial side of things. So again, it's very early. I don't see it hitting really the financial services space very much. But I am also seeing it in like the content area. So you can experience storytelling with augmented reality. So entertainment as kind of a byproduct of gaming is I see a big spot for augmented reality.
Yes, I think gaming and sports and entertainment, those are the areas where we will see a lot of advances. Now, as we see now that, the digital order that we had, the connectivity that everyone had across nations is slowly, getting towards digital disorder, because China is, trying to close the door. I mean, they already don't allow the global information flow happening, in their country. They are controlling what information their citizens can have and cannot have. So they have their own way of controlling the information flow. Russia is also trying to do that, and many other countries are also trying to follow that, especially the authoritarian countries, because they don't want the free free flow of information coming to their citizens, and that is very unfortunate. But at the same time, we are also witnessing the from Google's solar drones to Facebook's solar drone, and now if we look at the internet satellite system that Elon Musk is trying to have, and also Facebook is trying to achieve that by having those satellite constellation of satellites up in the space. The goal is to have the internet connectivity available to everyone in the world. So how do you see this playing out while our technology people, these corporations are doing their best to connect everyone, irrespective of if they are in very, very remote, rural areas, or, where there are no internet connections available. The efforts are that they also can be connected. But at the same time, we see the governments are trying to prevent prevent that internet connectivity. So where do you see this battle between the technology companies and the authoritarian governments going forward, especially about the connectivity and communication technology?
Right. So, I mean, that is an amazingly important topic you bring up, because we're seeing now some of the unintended consequences of all of this new technology. And so it's not only governments, but also big tech, as you mentioned. The power. Sometimes it is perceived that something like the internet distributes its power from the big to the small, from the governments to the individuals, when in fact we're seeing that that's not necessarily the case. That having access to the internet is very important and very critical for economic development and such. However, as we've found in the United States, that social media can be used by foreign governments to influence elections. And we've seen that happen in the United States. We've seen that happen in Europe, where some of the most educated economies with the most access have been greatly impacted by bad actors in terms of controlling communication and micro-targeting communication in elections for certain candidates. And so I think we might be seeing almost the worst case scenario, where we've given unfettered access to everyone, to everything, including a bunch of bad actors who have figured out how to use that to spread false facts,
Yes.
and influence elections.
Sure. I mean, that is just one aspect. I mean, what we have done is, when we established the internet, we designed, the cyberspace. We gave anonymity to everyone and everything. So when the data is blind, so if somebody sends us cyber missiles or cyber weapons, until it reaches to our laptops or our computers, we don't know that what it is. And only when we open, then we come to know that, yes, that was a cyber bomb or cyber missile, and everything is destroyed now. So the way we have designed internet, and we have no security controls anywhere. When data enters our country, there is nobody checking the data. When data goes to the internet service providers, nobody checks that. And when it comes to us, most of the citizens, they are not very familiar in how to protect their computers. And even those who are really familiar and are fluent in their cybersecurity, even they are not secured. So that is just because of the nature of the game, that the way we have designed the architecture of the internet, that has given us a lot of great benefits and a lot of huge security risks. And that is the biggest challenge. But what these authoritarian countries are doing is preventing the free flow of information. And for them, one of the reasons could be they don't want the citizens to know what is happening in the world, because more information they have, it will open up their minds towards more different ideas that could put their governance structures at threat. And that is what is probably behind all these decisions that are emerging from authoritarian nations. Because a free mind, if you give anybody an ability to think and give information, then they will think, and based on the information they get, and they will start asking questions. And in democratic countries like Western countries, asking questions is not a crime. But in authoritarian countries, if you ask question, that becomes challenging, because governments don't want to hear that. So it is a challenge, because it has given internet is a cyberspace is a dual use. So yes, there are a lot of challenges happening, but we'll have to, every country will have to figure out where they want to go. I mean, how much control they want to keep on their citizens. And if you want to really innovate, what kind of freedom you need to give to your citizens. Because without, having freedom in thought, freedom in, ideas, you can only, innovate so much. So these are the big tough decisions every country's governments, decision makers will have to make in the coming years. But if we talk about internet, I mean, internet in the current form is not going to just be that. In the coming years, we will see BrainNet because of the advances that are happening now, as we saw with Neuralink, Elon Musk initiative. And, a lot of other developments happening in the mind, technologies, in the brain, neurotechnologies, that we will be able to communicate, just brain to brain. We can upload information also, just based on how much we want to, through the electrode that is inserted in our brain, or something that you wear on your brain, just head. I mean, there are a lot of developments happening in that space. So the internet in the current form is going to evolve very rapidly. It could go towards BrainNet also. So if we establish that, then the thoughts and emotions and feelings and memories will be able to transmit instantly across the planet. So do you see a possibility of BrainNet replacing internet? I mean, I see that it's going to happen, and it's going to bring us enormous amount of security risk, because once we open that channel, then anybody will have the power to control human population anywhere, because they can send some signal, and that what they are trying to communicate can be to make the humans on large scale do what they want to do, if we go more forward that. But what do you see based on where you
Yeah,
are?
I think what you suggest is that in the realm of the possible someday, perhaps. I think looking at the much more close term is we have to look at the evolution of the internet and of communication systems, and the thing I'm really excited about is 5G, and so. That takes the availability of data, the availability of content, the connectivity to an incredibly high level. Now, there's the question of, are there security concerns given who has manufactured much of the 5G equipment? But I've seen from what I've seen on the 5G, that's really what's going to be. People are going to open up their Christmas presents in a year or two or three to really see an entirely different experience based on data, based on artificial intelligence and machine learning, and there'll be a whole different set of products, as well as capabilities and risks, given what 5G will bring us.
Yeah, 5G is, I think countries are rushing towards 5G. We have to be very, very cautious. And 4G, I mean, if we're talking only about connectivity, 4G also has given connectivity. I mean, we don't need 5G for connectivity. 5G is more important for transfer of large amounts of data, like when
Right.
we have the autonomous cars, or if we are doing, robotic surgery, or, remote surgeries using robots. Those are the fields where we will need 5G. But at the same time, like what is the debate right now about who is the manufacturer, and that is very important to evaluate, because with 5G, as you know, that we are not going to be able to just go ahead with just having one antenna, or one transmission channel. We will need so many antennas at every few hundred feet. So you are seeing to connect everything, in residential area, in business areas, because the millimeter waves, they don't travel for long distance. So we will need so many antennas, and it will, while the health risks are also in question, that what it does this 5G to the human health. It is also in question about what it does to any living thing. We are not just talking about humans, but any life, like animals, plants, insects, everything. So there are a lot of still unsolved questions, and especially about the manufacturer, because it's not just about any hardware, software. It has an algorithm with it, especially with this kind of technology. So whoever has written the code of the this technology, we don't, unless we audit that code, we don't know what commands are given in that code. So unless we know for sure what is the agenda, what is the purpose of the algorithm, what it's designed to do, then we are putting ourselves at a huge risk. And these are the questions every country's decision makers need to decide, and especially the United Nations needs to look into all these different questions. Because if we are developing technologies with these with the impact of, or such a huge potential and impact, then we need to know what these algorithms are designed to do. And right now we don't have system, we don't have any system that looks into the security risk of any algorithm. It doesn't matter which country the technology is coming from, but we need a system which can evaluate the security risk of each of these algorithms, each of these technologies, and we just don't have that. So, what do you think? Do you see United Nations working on any initiative towards that?
Well, the United Nations and the global community overall is working on all of these initiatives in some degree or another. And so the one of the initiatives I'm involved in is so looking at the legal aspects of data ownership and property ownership, and how do you utilize the current legal concepts in the many legal traditions we have in the world for things like distributed data, for things like smart contracts. And so what happens if two individuals who are utilizing a distributed ledger technology, who have entered into a smart contract, which may not be a contract legally at all? How do you enforce that kind of agreement across borders in a way where traditional third-party middlemen, banks, for example, are no longer involved because it's distributed? So how do you enforce if one party does not perform? And so there's a whole stew of legal issues before we even get to the ones you just mentioned, which are validating the algorithms around artificial intelligence and decision making and such. And where is the liability if one of those algorithms does something wrong? And so, what happens if an autonomous vehicle crashes into someone? Whose liability is that? Is that the manufacturer? Is the programmer? Is it the purchaser of the vehicle? I mean, there's just a whole enormous lake of legal issues to look at. And I think the international community is certainly one place, one group of entities to look at those as well as individual countries.
No, I mean, laws are one thing, legality is one thing. We will have to, of course, define all those legal, guidelines on, what happens when, autonomous vehicle or anything can, if somebody dies, who is responsible, manufacturer or, so and so. Those questions will need to be resolved. But what I'm asking is about the security risk, because these are algorithms that will be controlling everything, and if we do not know what the commands are given to the algorithm, then we are putting the entire human species at risk, because we just don't know what those algorithms are designed for, who is watching out, unless you, and a lot of this programming happens in local languages, which not everybody is familiar with, and unless we know what is in the algorithm. Right now there is democratization of innovation, cyberspace. This is what cyberspace has given us, that any individual, anyone with just $1,000 computer is able to create anything that they want to. Anybody with just a 40-50,000 can create a lab in their house or basement or wherever, and do some gene editing experiments, create entirely new pathogen if they want to, just in $40-50,000. So these are the kind of challenges we are facing right now, because how do we, when there is democratization of destruction, when anybody has now the power to develop tools that can destroy, how are we governing? Our current governance models do not fit at all, because with the democratization of destruction, how are we going to manage the security risk coming our way by just developing laws? Because once somebody develops a pathogen, throws it in the air or water or whichever form, then the entire human species could be at risk. And how will we stop it? We don't have the capability at this point. If somebody throws a cyber missile towards a country, we don't have a way to stop it right now. We don't, until it reaches us, we just don't have a way to know. That's why the cyber investigation is a huge problem, because even right now, the countries are not even cooperating with each other, but at the same time, it becomes too late. The anonymity that cyberspace gives to anyone and everyone is a huge security risk for everyone.
Yeah, so that's an enormous topic you just mentioned, and so balancing personal freedoms with government control. So one should, of course, have control of very powerful technologies, as you mentioned, pathogens and other cyber tools, which should be locked down by significant security. And then, but the question is, so where's the boundary between giving individuals the freedom to utilize new technologies, computing technologies, basic computing technologies, access to the internet, access to data, and utilizing that to do good versus creating something devastating. And so the big question then is who manages that? There's no world government, and so that's in the individual states, individual countries' purview to do the right thing and find the balance, which will probably be different country to country, culture to culture, as to where that balance is between personal freedom and good for the common good. And so I think that's a question that the ages have been wrestling with whenever a new technology comes around, and I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that.
This is a very complex question, and it involves the very fundamentals of how we govern. because when there is, so far, over the years, whenever, we had to control any technology or monitor if somebody is making anything destructive, it was very easy to just track the flow of the money, because all of these technologies so far, nuclear technology and all others, that require large amounts of money and certain chemicals, so we were easily able to track it, that who is developing what, and we are able to control it so far. But these emerging technologies that we are talking about, it is impossible to track it, or it's impossible to know who is working on what. And this doesn't require much investment. It's $1,000 $2,000 investment. Anybody could be working on anything, and we have given everyone anonymity. So these are very, very complex challenges that human species or any government has ever faced in their entire existence of their country. So governments will have to come together, and especially United Nations need to think about all these bigger questions, because how do we govern democratization of destruction? That is the one question that needs to be discussed and debated. But that's a topic of another discussion. Let's talk about your favorite topic, blockchain for financial services. Where do you see it going?
So I'm, really excited about where that could possibly go. And again, now is the time for the hard work. So, the first few years, blockchain was dominated by the big app of the killer app of Bitcoin. And now that the speculators have come and gone, the most of the criminals have come and gone, that now it's time to get down to hard work. And you're getting to a right place when you go to these conferences, when you go to the blockchain conferences, and they're no longer filled with salespeople. They're filled with operations people and credit people and folks who are understanding the analytics. And so that's where we are now. And so what I'm excited about is that there's 1,000 terrible uses for blockchain and distributed ledger technology, but I think there's a bunch of good ones. One of which is supply chain finance and trade finance. And so that data is distributed all throughout the process, whether it's in ports or on ships. And much of it of that data is not digital. And so we're finding that people are working on the digitalization of that data, and then they can include that in a much broader distributed ledger technology. And so I'm seeing, a lot of efforts in Latin America with something like LACchain to bring a lot of the unbanked into the system, utilizing blockchain and distributed ledger technology. So it's still early days, and when paired with artificial intelligence and cloud, you can get some very, very effective applications of blockchain and distributed ledger in combination with those in an area, for example, of digital identity and know your customer, EKYC. I'm seeing some just incredible leaps forward where the cost of regulation compliance will go straight down, and the effectiveness in places like Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering will skyrocket up, utilizing blockchain as well as artificial intelligence. And so I'm excited to be working with a number of startups who are doing that exact use case.
Yes, that is a very exciting field. And think about the possibility and potential. If we are able to digitize everything and tag everything with the, UIDs, then it is the very problem that everyone is facing right now about, or having problem with the internet, is about the, transparency and trust that is not there. Blockchain will be able to provide that, because let's say, any kind of weapons, as soon as the manufacturers manufacture any number of weapon, each of them is tagged, and then entered that digitally into the blockchain, then we can track the movement of any gun, any amount, any other weapon that is produced, or any raw materials, or anything. So this is very exciting. Blockchain is going to give us such a transformative ability if we are able to utilize its full potential. So it will be very interesting to see where this goes, and especially the cryptocurrencies. The money is evolving. The form of money is evolving. From now, the paper money is getting out of the door, and digital money and the cryptocurrency are entering. And the cryptocurrency, we still have to figure out a lot of problems, because one thing is the security of that. Once
Right.
wallets
Right.
are not secured, and there is no way to tie the money to how much money I owe or you owe in cryptocurrency, or anybody owes. There is no way. It's anonymous, so anybody can hack in, and anybody can steal all that money. I was reading about some Bitcoin. Someone in that field who had traveled to India recently, and he was found dead, and then his entire wallet. I'm not sure what the entire story is, but it had millions of dollars in that, and there is nothing in that. That's what I read somewhere, and there are a lot of cases we are hearing like that, where all the cryptocurrency disappears, and then there is no way to track it. So we do need some tracking capability of the cryptocurrency also. So the entirely blind, anonymous, transaction, I don't think it will work for future, because the masses, will be at risk. They will lose everything, if they keep it in cryptocurrency format. So the security aspect, I think governments will need to figure out. If we want to use cryptocurrency, it's a good format, but we do need to make sure that people don't lose out on their savings, entire life savings, and the money just doesn't disappear and goes into wrong hands. So that those are the questions we still need to figure out. But having said that, what would you like to tell our global viewers and listeners, especially about the initiatives that you are working on, the startups that you are working with?
Well, so I'm very, very excited about the utilization of a number of these distributed and disruptive technologies, particularly in, as you mentioned, financial services, but also in regulatory technology. And so regulatory compliance is extremely expensive and extremely cumbersome, and utilizing artificial intelligence, distributed ledger technology, and other technologies that we're now right at the very beginning of seeing those to start work in a very effective way. And so in areas like anti-money laundering, so what percentage of money laundering is successful, and what percentage of money laundering is caught? So according to the United Nations, 1% roughly of money laundering is caught, which means 99% of it is successful. And so there are a lot of new technologies, particularly around AI, that can be extremely effective in figuring out whether it's good money or bad. And so now we're working with the startups I'm working on with a large number of regulators to figure out how to incorporate those technologies into the regulated sphere, so that regulators can get comfortable, and we can do a much better job in tracking anti-money laundering. And then with, for example, Know Your Customer, KYC, using a more digitized KYC to connect with identities around the world, even if they're not a single identity, country identity, to be able to bring in a lot of unbanked people into the banking system and get them the money, the capital that they need. So I'm very, very excited about a number of those initiatives, because they've been being worked on for quite some time. Now they're starting to blossom, and it's really super, super exciting.
Yes, definitely. It is super exciting. So thank you so much, Bob, for participating in Risk Roundup today. We appreciate your thoughtful insight on the technology trends, and I'm sure our global viewers and listeners would benefit tremendously from the information you provided on the technology trends, because it will give them some ideas on what initiatives are working, and where they need to focus. And those are, all very useful information. That's very useful information for anyone to have, any country to have. So the discussion that we had today is going to be very, very helpful, and we thank you for that.
Great. Thank you very much.
Wonderful there, Bob. So Risk Roundup, a global initiative launched by Risk Group, is a security risk reporting for risk emerging from existing and emerging technologies, technology convergence and transformation happening across cyberspace, aquaspace, geospace, and space. We at Risk Group believe that risk management, security, and peace, they walk together hand in hand. Though security is related to management of threats and peace to the management of conflict, risk management is related to management of security vulnerabilities as well as management of conflict. And it is not possible to conceive any one of the three without the existence of the other two. All three concepts feed into each other. We believe that the security we build for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secure for everyone across nations. Tradition becomes our security. So if we build a culture of managing risk effectively, it will lead us to security, and security will lead us to peace. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the Risk Roundups, to watch the Risk Roundup videos or hear the Risk Roundup podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayashree, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.